In the world of video cameras, bigger is better and more expensive is more professional, right? Well, sort of. Fortunately, the technical characteristics and features of a professional camera are actually fairly easy to define and understand. In the next few minutes, we're going to go deep inside the camcorder, focusing on the CCD, showing you not only how it works, but why it's important, here on TechKnow. Let's start with the deceptively simple and obvious. Light from our subject enters the front of the camera through the lens. While it's tempting to call that an explanation and move on, stop and think for a second how important this is. First, our scene needs to be illuminated properly. This is both literally and figuratively outside of the camera and outside of the realm of this discussion. But I would argue this. Good lighting is the primary difference between professional video and amateur home movies. In the real world of event videography and E&G, however, running gun shooters often have to live with poor lighting. So low light performance is an important characteristic, and this starts with the lens. Quite simply, larger diameter lenses capture more light. Think about those gigantic telescope lenses and mirrors. Once we've stepped through the glass, the next hurdle for the light is the aperture. The aperture is primarily used to get the exposure right. Not too much light, not too little. It also controls the depth of field, which is an extremely important artistic tool. In short, opening the aperture gives you the most control of the depth of field and focus. While we aren't going to spend any more time on this important tool in this segment, suffice it to say that the correspondingly smaller lenses found on compact, convenient consumer camcorders have limited control of the depth of field. Along with the aperture, the other factor that controls the exposure is the shutter. Fast shutter speeds mean that the shutter is open for shorter periods of time, which decreases the amount of light that gets through to the CCD. The shutter also controls the amount of blur you get on a single frame of video, which in turn affects the feel of full motion video. This brings us to the image sensor, which is a CCD in most of today's camcorders. In reality, we had already arrived at the CCD just a moment ago when we discussed the shutter. Most consumer camcorders do not have a physical shutter, but instead determine the duration of the exposure electronically. In any case, and to summarize a great deal of sophisticated electronics in a sentence or two, once the light hits the CCD, it is converted into an analog electrical signal and sent to another chip where it is digitally processed. This processing includes error correction, filtering, white balance, and color transformation, among other things. Oftentimes, this all happens on a single dedicated media processor chip. Newer and cheaper CMOS technology incorporates the light gathering and processing circuits all on the same chip. Generally speaking, while CMOS chips are more efficient and cheaper to manufacture, CCDs are less electronically noisy and produce better quality images. Image sensors are obviously a lot more complex in the details, vary in their sensitivity to light and the quality of the images that they produce. Increasing the sensitivity can increase the amount of electronic noise, however. Professional camcorders have gain controls to vary the sensitivity of the chip and thus the level of the noise. In most situations, you'd want to leave the gain at 0 dB and control the exposure with the aperture and shutter. Some cameras have a simple low, medium, high toggle, and some give you a little more control over a range of values, for example, plus or minus 12. Increasing the gain to plus 18 dB is very likely to introduce noise into the picture. Pragmatically, however, if plus 18 means getting the shot, as opposed to not getting the shot, a little noise is just the price you pay. Larger CCDs with more pixels are clearly better than smaller CCDs with less pixels. Larger CCDs have better low light performance, while more pixels means better resolution. For example, under the same conditions, a small consumer camcorder with a 1/6 inch CCD will just not be able to produce as bright an image as this Panasonic HVX200 can with 1/3 inch CCDs, or as bright as this $60,000 VariCam can with 2/3 inch CCDs. There isn't a straight relationship between chip size and the number of pixels, however. The CCD also determines the aspect ratio. HD cameras, for example, have a proper 16:9 aspect ratio by default. You might be surprised to learn that CCDs don't record in color. Individual elements in an array only detect and record the intensity of the light hitting them, and color is actually added to the image data later during the processing phase. If a single CCD is used, individual elements in the array are actually dedicated to record only one color in the RGB color space. This is done by placing tiny color filters in front of individual elements. The first pixel in an array, for example, might have a red filter in front of it, and therefore only record the intensity of red light. The pixel next to that one might have a green filter and record green light. And so the array of pixels that make up the CCD is covered by a very fine color filter array. The exact nature of this filter depends on the design of the chip, but the point is that the CCD is not capturing a full resolution version of the color information. The CCD does record a full resolution grayscale image. And since the human eye and visual perceptual system are more sensitive to differences in brightness than to color, this is an elegant and economical solution. Furthermore, the image data will eventually be encoded with some type of digital compression. For example, DV25 in the case of mini DV camcorders. And this almost always involves some sort of color sampling anyhow. Professional camcorders can capture color at full resolution using 3 individual CCDs, one for each color. Between the lens and the CCDs is a beam-splitting prism, which splits the light up into its component RGB colors, which are diffracted off to individual CCDs that then record the intensity of the light in each color at full resolution. The lens itself in such a system is more complex, and the addition of the prism block, 2 more CCDs, and the circuitry to integrate them makes 3 CCD camcorders comparatively more expensive than single CCD systems. But this is something to look for in a professional camera. Once the light is captured, the image is digitally processed and stored to some medium. The media itself in this digital age is relatively unimportant. In the recent past, it's been videotape, but optical discs, hard disks, and solid-state media are all becoming more common. In all cases, the recording media is finite, which means that some kind of digital compression is used, and this is relatively important. The most common compression for consumer camcorders to mini DV tape is DV25, for example. Camera phones and consumer optical disc cameras often use much more efficient compression, but that also compromises the quality even more than DV25. On the professional end, there are a host of less compressed formats, all the way up to and including uncompressed signals sent directly to hard disk from the camera. Here's the application of all this theory. When shopping for a professional camcorder, look for large glass, 3 large CCDs, and less compression. You might also look for interchangeable lenses, XLR microphone inputs, and lots of manual controls. While the consumer realm is filled with a bewildering array of models and features, in the professional realm, you're only going to find a very small number of camcorders, perhaps only 3 or 4 at any particular price point. This will make your comparison research much easier. Finally, if you can't afford a VariCam, shoot the best video you can with the best camera you can afford. Modern camcorders, even inexpensive consumer ones, shoot truly brilliant video, and a VariCam isn't the remedy for lame content and poor technique anyhow. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.